All right, everyone, ready to go deep. Today, we're tackling a real head-scratcher. How did humans go from, scattered tribes to building entire civilizations? We're talking laws, governments, the whole shebang.
The whole 9 yards.
And get this, our guide for this wild ride is the Urantia Book.
Specifically, Paper 71, which dives into how the state evolved.
Now, I know, this isn't your typical history book. It's got some, unique ideas about where it came from.
Right.
But trust me, the ideas themselves are worth exploring, even if the origins are a bit,
Mysterious.
Exactly, mysterious. Okay, so no sugarcoating here. The book doesn't paint a pretty picture of early humans. Basically, it says conquest was the name of the game back then.
Yeah, pretty much said, forget peace prizes. Early humans were all about, dominating each other. Stronger groups taking what they wanted, often through force. It's kind of brutal, but that struggle for power, that's actually a foundation for how complex societies came to be.
So it's like the first ingredient in the civilization recipe is conquer your neighbors. Yikes. But here's the thing. The Iroquois Confederacy, they never quite hit full-blown statehood, did they?
They didn't.
And we all learned about them in school. So what went wrong? What was missing from their recipe?
The book points to a few things. For one, the Iroquois didn't really have a concept of private property, which, if you look back, most early states were built on.
Really?
Yeah. And they also didn't have those big, bustling cities, the kind that act like centers for trade and culture. And even their use of domesticated animals was limited. These might seem like small details, but the book argues they made a huge difference in how the Iroquois developed.
So it's like missing ingredients threw the whole dish off.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the Iroquois missed the mark, what about a super successful state like Rome? What did they do right?
Well, the book highlights how the Romans really nailed those key ingredients we were talking about, especially things like family structure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, strong families, mastering agriculture and animal domestication, and of course, those famous Roman roads that connected their massive empire. The book suggests these were all essential to Rome's success.
Okay, but even Rome eventually crumbled. And here's where it gets really interesting. The book blames Rome's rapid expansion and all the turmoil that came with it for its eventual collapse. Right, and doesn't that sound a little too familiar, like grow too fast or change too much too quickly, and things start to fall apart?
That is a parallel the book seems to draw. It's almost like a cautionary tale, but the potential dangers of change that outpaces a society's ability to adapt.
Makes you think, right? Even well-intentioned changes, if they happen too fast or too broadly, can backfire.
It's true. And that takes us to the big question. If even mighty empires like Rome had an expiration date, how do we build something more lasting?
So that brings us to, what most people think is the magic solution, democracy, right? Give everyone a voice, power to the people, problem solved.
Well, not so fast. This is actually where the Urantia book throws a bit of a wrench in the works. It's got some pretty direct warnings about, the downsides of democracy.
Oh, now you've got my attention. This is where things get interesting. Most folks think democracy is like the end-all be-all of good government. So tell me more about these downsides.
Well, the book makes this point that just because everyone gets an equal say doesn't mean those voices are, equally informed or wise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It even uses this phrase, it's a bit blunt, calls it the glorification of mediocrity.
Ouch.
Right, like sometimes appealing to the masses can actually drown out the voices of expertise and reason, the people who really know what they're talking about.
It's like just because something's popular doesn't mean it's the best way to go.
Exactly. And the book goes even further. It highlights how public opinion can be really powerful, sure, but also super slow to change. And it can be really vulnerable to manipulation.
Okay, yeah, think about it. How many times do people vote based on, actual logic and facts versus, I don't know, a catchy slogan or a gut feeling? It's kind of scary.
It is. The book definitely seems to be saying, hey, democracy, it's fragile, handle with care.
So what's the answer then? How do we make sure this whole democracy thing doesn't, completely go off the rails?
The key, according to the Urantia book, is education. And I don't just mean knowing your history dates. It's about having a population that's well-informed, capable of making rational decisions, not just reacting to, the loudest voice in the room.
So it's about thinking for yourself, being critical, not just following the crowd.
Right. It even uses this great phrase, ballots over bullets. It's advocating for peaceful, gradual change through understanding and knowledge.
Okay, so knowledge is power. Speaking of knowledge, the Urantia book lays out these 10 steps for, building a really solid government. Some of them seem pretty straightforward, like freedom of speech, protecting private property. Those seem like no-brainers. But then it gets into some really specific, almost kind of radical ideas.
It definitely does. Like, it doesn't just say government representatives need to be qualified. It practically calls for a system where leaders are chosen based on their specific expertise in the areas they're governing.
So instead of career politicians, we'd have like expert panels calling the shots.
In a way, yeah. It's like saying, we wouldn't let just anyone perform brain surgery, so why should running a country be any different?
Okay, yeah, I can see how that could get a bit controversial. What else in those 10 steps might ruffle some feathers?
Well, it puts a huge emphasis on actual public service. And I don't mean just saying the right things, but a real, genuine dedication to governing for the benefit of everyone, not just for personal gain or power.
You mean like politicians should actually be lining up for the job because they're genuinely passionate about helping people, not because they're after a bigger paycheck or a fancy title.
Exactly. It's about totally changing the way we think about public office. Like, the book paints this picture of a society where being chosen to govern is the highest honor, a chance to use your talent for the greater good, something people would actually strive for.
So let me get this straight. We're talking about a world where folks are practically fighting to run for office, like it's the newest iPhone or something. Sign me up. But seriously, are we really picturing a society where everyone's suddenly chasing wisdom and the greater good instead of, a bigger piece of the pie? Because that's where things start sounding a little too good to be true.
It's definitely a different picture than we're used to, and the Urantia book doesn't shy away from that. It acknowledges that even in this more, well, idealized state, human nature doesn't just disappear.
Right, because even if everybody suddenly turned into philosophers overnight, wouldn't we still run into the same problems, like competition for resources, disagreements on how things should run, just, the usual human drama?
Exactly. The book isn't suggesting conflict magically disappears. It recognizes that even in an advanced civilization, you'd still need ways to handle disagreements, systems to protect against threats, both internal and external.
Okay, so it's not about pretending conflict doesn't exist, but maybe finding better ways to deal with it. Speaking of different approaches, the book seems to have some strong opinions on, well, profit as the main driving force in society, right?
Absolutely. The Urantia book is pretty clear. In this ideal state, a purely profit-driven system just wouldn't cut it. It challenges the idea of material wealth being the ultimate goal.
So instead of just chasing profits, it's about what? Contributing to the community through innovation, service, that sort of thing. I mean, could that actually work? What would motivate people if it wasn't about bigger paychecks or fancier gadgets?
That's the million-dollar question, right? What the Urantia book points to is a society where wisdom, service to others, even spiritual growth become driving forces, where fulfillment comes from contributing to something bigger than yourself.
Whoa, okay. Now I gotta ask, imagine a world where education and innovation weren't all about, like, the bottom line, but about solving global problems, where cooperation actually trumped cutthroat competition. What would that even look like?
It's a whole different paradigm, right?
It really is.
And the book suggests that it's not just a pipe dream. It envisions a future where international disputes are settled not through war, but through, get this, a global court system. A world united by a common language, where communication and understanding could flow freely across borders.
I'll admit, it's hard to picture sometimes. But think about it. What if we measured success not just by, like, how much money you're making, but by things like well-being, sustainability, how we treat each other? The book seems to be saying those things are possible, but it would take a huge shift in our values and our priorities. It's a future that might seem a long way off, maybe even impossible sometimes. But if the Urantia book's right, it's a future we're already moving towards, however slowly. So here's something to ponder. What role do we each play in building that future? What small choices can we make today that, reflect those higher ideals? Wisdom, service, a greater good. That's something I'll be thinking about, and I hope you will too. Until next time, happy diving.